And we're live, and this is Rebecca Hogue, otherwise known as Becky, and this is our second formal virtually connecting session for ePatients, and today we're talking about why we blog. So I blog about breast cancer and about celiac disease at bcbecky.com, and I'm going to, we're going to do a round of introductions, and then we're going to chat. So first over to my co-host, Brittany.
Hi, I'm Brittany. I blog at Best Liar You Know because as people with chronic illnesses, we're all really good at lying. Even just the little stuff like, how are you today? We tend to lie about, innocently enough, but still happens. I have confirmed endometriosis and gastroparesis, and we're working on other diagnoses right now. So I'm glad to be here with all of you. Anne?
I'm Ann Silberman, and I blog at Breast Cancer, but Doctor, I Hate Pink. I blog about metastatic breast cancer. I've been blogging since 2009 when I was diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer, and in 2011 was about to shut the blog down and was diagnosed with MET, so kept blogging, and here I am, still here.
Michelle?
It is me. Okay, it's me. Hi, I'm Michelle. I'm from Australia, and I blog at livingwith.com. Primarily, my blog's about dysautonomia, which is a dysfunction of the autonomic nervous system. I have a host of other conditions as well, but that's sort of the primary one that I blog about. And also just chronic illness and disability issues in general. Been blogging since 2007, so a while now. And, 2009. I don't know why I said 2007. It's early here. Too early. Excuse me. But yeah, and that's me, basically.
Scott?
Okay. Hi, I'm Scott Johnson. I blog, such as it is, at I don't know the name of my blog, ScottX5 at WordPress.com, which is from another course, which I really should start my own blog on my own blog. Colon cancer a couple of years ago, chemotherapy, the confusion from chemotherapy. I live rurally, so I have no connection with the medical system here in Alberta. It doesn't work outside the cities. So I do a lot of complaining about that, and I'm trying to work out some sort of a fixed solution to what's going on. But like today, I called up to get some information on how to get an encrypted email line so I can contact my specialists, because you have to have it encrypted. It's a privacy thing. And they never called back. So that's the way it goes here. And I think there's no one to talk to outside of yourself in the medical system, because nobody wants to believe that it doesn't work. So there it is.
There we go. And Kate, do you want to introduce yourself? Oh, now we can't hear you. We could hear her and she couldn't hear us, and now we can't hear her. Yeah, okay.
Don't know sign language.
Rebecca, we lost you. We can't hear you. You have your mute on.
I have my mute on. I suck.
Yeah.
You can't hear me because I'm muted. Okay. You'll just listen. Okay. And okay. Do you want to try, Kate? If you want to type anything, Kate, about a quick introduction, I can we can do that. While you're doing that, I just realized that we didn't tell anybody where we were from, and I don't quite know where everyone is sitting. So I'll start with I'm in Sunnyvale, California, which is about an hour south of San Francisco and just north of San Jose. I don't want to go in the same order. So Brittany. Right.
I'm in Blacksburg, Virginia, which is home of Virginia Tech. That usually helps people find where we are. Or 5 hours south of Washington, D.C.
And I'm in Sacramento, California, so kind of near Sunnyvale. I'll be heading into the city tomorrow.
I didn't realize you were so close.
Yeah.
I'm in Australia, as I said. I'm in a place called Gippsland, which is about 3 hours east of Melbourne, down in the southern states. Very cold.
And I'm in Alberta, Canada. We're northeast, about 3 hours northeast of Edmonton, in a place called Lac La Biche. And to tell you how nice the place is, my doctor just quit and is moving home. So, but we don't see her very often. Anyway, that's it.
Okay, and Kate is in Wollongong, Australia. Okay, so it's wrong, not Melbourne, Wollongong, Australia. And she blogs at musicfordeckchairs.com on education and educational technology. Was diagnosed with stage 2 cancer and decided to include that as relevant in her work life and her thoughts on wellness and higher education. And she's an awesome writer as well, so pretty cool. So the first question I'm going to throw out, we'll start the conversation off, is sort of why. The question, part of the reason this whole conversation came about is because I was at a conference talking to researchers, or actually attending sessions, and the researchers used blogs, illness blogs in particular, in their research in different ways. Some of them were like counseling people who were trying to understand the patient experience. And so one of the big advantages for them for blogs, well, they have two. One, they don't need ethics to use them because they're in the public internet space. And two, because they're unsolicited patient responses, and so they see that as much more authentic than the ones that are solicited by research. So it's kind of an interesting reason for doing it. But they were trying to puzzle out in their minds why anyone would share such intimate details about themselves in a public space. And that was actually it was really fascinating to see them try and sort of figure this out, but everybody was sort of doing it from an outsider perspective. And so that's part of why I thought, well, you know what? I know bloggers. Let's see if bloggers will come on and talk to me about why they actually blog about it. So I'm going to throw that out to the general population, you guys, and tell, why do you guys blog?
There's a lot of reasons. I mean, it's morphed over the years why I've blogged. When I was first diagnosed, I'd always been a blogger. I'd blogged before, several blogs before, so I'd been blogging since the early days of the internet. But when I was diagnosed, one of the first things I thought of when the doctor told me I had cancer was, okay, but I hate pink. That'll be a good name for a blog, so I'd always planned on doing it. I thought it would be a great way to notify family and friends about my condition without having to be interrupted or having to repeat the same thing over and over. I also had looked online for other blogs and couldn't find anything that would tell me what was going to happen to me, and I think all of us can relate when we're first diagnosed. We want to know what is going to happen to us. And I couldn't find anything, so I thought, well, I'll be the one to write it so that somebody else comes along and they can have that information. And I had no idea it would ever become as widely read as it has been, but I'm glad it's turned into a community. So I never expected that part, but now I have a whole community around me, people I really do consider friends who read my blog, who follow my Facebook page, and who talk to each other about illness and other things. So it's really been a wonderful thing.
I think that thing that you mentioned, Anne, about the morphing I think a lot of us, we start off blogging for one reason, and then over time, particularly once you've done it for quite a few years, it changes what your initial reason was. It's still sort of there as well, but it morphs over time. So for me, initially it was just almost a sounding board, almost a therapeutic thing to write out what was going on for me. And plus having a disorder that no one's heard of, very little information that's out there. Most of it was primarily medical at the time. So that lived experience of it, like you were saying, that what is actually going to happen? What does it mean and feel like to be a patient with this disorder? And then being able to share that with other people, and then they're like, oh my God, I'm not alone. I'm not alone in this. And I think that for me is sort of how it's morphed over time. It's still my therapeutic agent and my primary one. I have done actual therapy as well, but it's sort of morphed, and that sense of community that grows with it, and the multiple voices, so everyone can find someone they relate to. And I think that's just such an important part of the whole blogging experience.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I don't think that my sense is that I don't really exist to my doctors. They're all in another city. The ones that are here can't seem to keep track of me. They send me off to appointments with the wrong paperwork. And the sense is that when I get there, when I do a 3-hour drive to get to the doctors, and they're in a rush, they got to have me out of there in 10 minutes. The last time I saw my cardiologist, she asked me if I had any chest pain, and I never got a chance to say yes. She says, oh, that's good, 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 and gave me a big smile, and out the door I go. And she's the one that, between my first heart attack and my second heart attack, I was supposed to be monitored, and she went off on, and this is no knocking people that go off on maternity leave, but she went off on maternity leave, and the whole system shut down. So it's like, I'm just writing it down just in case, I don't make it on the next time that they fly me into the hospital. And there's going to be some record of their, I wouldn't call it malfeasance, I just feel like I'm kind of just not there. So it's nice to feel like you're there. And when you blog, other people confirm it. So.
It's a good way of sorting out your emotions that you go through. I mean, having a terminal illness, you go through quite a few emotions, and especially living for 5 years, it's up and down and up and down, and it's a very good way of sorting out your emotions. And the interesting thing I've found is that no matter what I write, I can share the most private thing, thinking I'm all alone, and I'll get a whole chorus of voices that have had the same experience. Scott, probably for you too. I have extremely good medical care, so I can't relate to that part of it. But I know that if you write something about something that happens, you probably have a whole bunch of people that say, "Yeah, I know what you mean," and can understand your position, and it's very helpful, I think, to be able to have that interaction and be able to sort it out in writing.
Well, my favorite part of going to see the doctor, if there is a favorite part, besides stopping for gas on the way and walking the dog at the gas station, is the waiting room. It's like nothing else happens in the hospital that it couldn't be just have waiting rooms. That's all I need. And you just meet people randomly at the waiting room, and your spirits get picked up, and then you go talk to the machine. And the machine says, well, the paperwork says you're fine, and you don't know where the paperwork came from because nobody ever talked to you. And you just nod your head and and wonder why you live in a place where the cost of medical is the highest in all of Canada. But they've never been taught to listen, so because they don't have time.
Kate is saying that she can totally relate to that, Scott. And I want to share what she shared in the chat box for people to hear, is that she decided to write her blog because when she was diagnosed, 2 women who had written openly about diagnosis and treatment were really helpful to her. And and I don't know, Zenny Jardin and at James Hands is sort of, or Pat James Hands. These accounts of treatment really helped her understand what was up ahead. But she ended up writing more about the intersection between illness and work rather than treatment itself, having drawn the line around treatment and not sure why. And said the difference between medical information and lived experience was really critical for me, and bloggers provided the most guidance. That's huge, you know, and I can relate to something that everybody has said pretty much. Anne and I actually have some interesting similarities in that I was a blogger well before I was diagnosed, and so I knew I was going to blog. I couldn't wait to open my blog, and I remember actually writing a blog post called "Imposter Syndrome" because I didn't have my pathology yet, and I felt like, what if this comes back and it's not cancer? And I started this blog about my experience and all this anxiety and all of this stuff I'm going through, and what if it isn't? And then, of course, by the time I got that blog post written and was about to hit send, I got the phone call from my surgeon saying it's cancer, you know, what we thought it was.
I can totally relate to that. I did exactly the same thing, only fortunately I only had to wait like 24 hours for the diagnosis, but as soon as they said, we think it's cancer, I knew right then that I was going to be blogging. I'm waiting.
Yeah, I was
post.
And I was told by the radiologist before even the biopsy that it was cancer. They were pretty sure by the images. But it was just still that, you know, there's still that 2% doubt that it might not be, because the BI-RADS were like 98% likely.
Yeah.
Which was so sort of crazy. And so I was compelled to blog, and because I'm a Canadian living in California, most of my family, I had moved here 3 weeks before I was diagnosed, so I didn't have a lot of infrastructure here. That my blog let everybody at home and everybody that knew me in Ottawa and other places keep track of what was going on, because for the first 2 weeks, I couldn't say it out loud. I couldn't speak it. And so it allowed me to actually express it. But I really want to go to some of the comments I think both Anne and Michelle had made about how my role as a blogger changed over time, because I didn't read blogs. I could not read breast cancer blogs for the first 3 months after diagnosis. I wrote all the time, but I did not read others because I just wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to join the community of women who might die. To be honest about it, and I think that sort of, and I knew that the minute I started interacting with other bloggers, because I was a blogger previously, that would be the signal of joining a community instead of just broadcasting my blog. Once you start commenting on someone else's, then you become part of that community, and I wasn't ready for that at the time. But it's interesting to see the progression from that individual to joining the community to working towards advocacy in the different spaces, and to see different bloggers in that way. We haven't heard from Brittany yet, so I want to pass over to her.
I'm still in the beginning stages of blogging. I think I started blogging maybe 3 years ago. And I mostly do it as a way to work through my feelings, and it was initially therapeutic. It still is, but I also go see my therapist every other week. And so some of the things don't end up on my blog anymore. I talk to her about them. And she has full access to my blog, so some of the things from beforehand come up. But it's definitely been a place where I rant a lot. I'm working through mystery illnesses. I started the blog before I had any confirmed illnesses. So with endometriosis, you can only confirm surgically. And I started the blog with a fairly certain that I had endometriosis. It runs in my family. I had all the symptoms. And we had 2 years of work around the medical tests trying to get me this to even get referred to a surgeon. And so I started blogging to work through the frustrations of okay, well, why are we doing this test? Or why aren't we doing this test? If an MRI might show it, why won't we do it? And how can I get doctors to work with that? And that, continued to snowball with my various other illnesses that have come up since. So it's a little spread, unlike everyone else. I don't really have a strong community around my blog. I like to follow other blogs, but both endometriosis and gastroparesis are still on the rare side of conditions, so we're kind of sparse and few between in the blogging world.
And do you find, Brittany, I know one of the things I've found is that doctors don't really give you the nitty-gritty of what it's like to live with things. So there's a lot of aspects, like for my particular disorder, dysautonomia, there's a focus on heart rate and blood pressure, and that's it. And yet it affects multiple body systems. So being able to blog about the less well-known and the less savoury, I guess, a lot of the too much information type issues. So there's a lot of things with bladder and bowel and sexuality and reproduction and all these things no one really wants to talk about, and your doctors never bring up because you're in there, they test your heart rate, they test your blood pressure, give you another pill, send you out the door. So through blogging, you're able to give those aspects, I guess, voice for other patients as well. And having been down the endometriosis route, I know that can do a lot of things
absolutely.
as well.
I blog quite a bit about sex and difficulties there. And I personally am not shy about that, so I know other people who that's still very taboo.
Yeah.
And for me, blogging about it not only helped me work through my personal feelings, but if somebody else can read that and go, oh, well, that's happening to me too, I feel that way too, that it's just an extra reason to do it. Talk about that.
That's hugely powerful, Brittany, because it's interesting because it's one of those questions I threw out to bloggers or people who were thinking about blogging is where do you draw the line? What do you share and not share? And Kate shared something about that early on where she didn't talk about her treatments, where I shared all my treatment, but I didn't talk about, sex-related things. Didn't feel comfortable about talking about the, so there was some of that line, knowing that my parents and in-laws were reading my blog. And so there's that.
I still haven't shared my blog with my family.
A line for me is when it affects somebody else. So if it's going to affect somebody else's privacy, then I just leave it out. People think that I write about everything, but that's not the case. There's a lot I don't. And I have kids. They're grown now. They weren't when I started blogging. And so I had to be careful, I got a certain amount of publicity locally and even nationally a few years back, and I wanted to be very careful of their privacy. So it's about me, I make it about me, and if it's going to be about somebody else, then I typically stay away. Even though there are issues that are important to other people, I just don't feel like, I have to share my entire life when it could embarrass or, make somebody else not want to have to deal with it.
That's a really good point. I'm mostly conscious with that. Like, I refer to all my doctors in acronyms, and I refer to my husband as a pseudonym, although I have my real name attached to my blog now, so if you know who I am, then you can probably figure out who he is. But when I talk about things like sex, it's obviously not a one-sided thing.
Yeah.
I have to include that part of the conversation, but I try and respect the line between, like, how much of it is from my perspective, how much am I sharing about what I'm going through and working through, and keeping that focus, like you said, Anne, on me and my side.
I think it comes down to that, who has the right to tell the story. You have the right to tell your own story, but for other people, they get to experience it in the way they want to experience it and how they want to share it. And I think it's a really important line as to where I guess the tone you talk about things or the way you talk about things and refocusing it, like you were saying, Brittany, onto you as opposed to your partner. And I'd use a pseudonym for my husband as well and all of that. But it's their story, in a sense, that you can't share, if that makes sense.
it makes total sense, and actually, it sort of brought up something that happened in a different group I was reading, and it was an advice thing, and somebody was asking about advice. I think it was even breast cancer related. It was certainly somebody getting biopsied for the first time in that wait period, and how to manage this and that. Actually, it was a different cancer, so it was like a 3-week wait period. And the first person who commented and gave advice was like, you will feel this, and you will feel that, and you will feel this. And I'm like, it just so set me off as like, oh my God, that is so how you do not talk to people, right? Again, it's back, I can tell you what I experienced. I'm not going to tell you what your feelings are going to be. It's sort of like the, well, you need to stay positive message, right? I can't tell you what you're going to feel. I can tell you what I felt. You know, and I think that that's sort of really important. I wanted to bring something up that came up in the chat box again. Kate had mentioned specifically we were talking about doctors and sort of that experience that goes on in the waiting room, but also the idea that our doctors don't have never experienced the illness, so they don't have that experience of knowing what that is. So that they don't know the nuances of the story that we can tell that they can't tell. And I'm just going to read this story that she told in the box and then let people react. She says, and I'm going to read it in first person because that's how she typed it, and it's too hard for me to transpose it in my brain. She says, I visited my oncologist one day, and she had a small bandage on her face where the skin cancer had been removed. I asked her about it, and I saw that flash of fear that you experience between test and diagnosis. And I thought, aha, welcome to the cancer, right? That sense of, your doctor finally understanding that, yeah, I totally get that, yeah.
Are they trained? Sorry, are they trained to not pay attention? I get it that. It's like I'm asking them, what was the time that was shown on the parking meter this morning, or actually last Tuesday? And can you tell me what that time was and how many coins you put in? And would they say they wouldn't know anything more about me than they would about the parking meter? And it seems to be almost studied. I've noticed that, like if I mentioned that I have heart problems, they put away the stethoscope. They step away from me. It's like I'm a lawsuit waiting to happen. So just stay away from this guy. You might know something. You might be able to tell us, or that actually we're listening to his liver. And I wonder if do doctors feel challenged by people to question? I mean, I certainly wouldn't want them to be telling my story because they certainly don't know anything about me.
Go ahead.
I've had a different experience than Scott, so I can't relate. My oncologist is wonderful, and I would never give him up. I fear the day he retires, and I don't feel like he has to know what I feel all the time. I want his expertise, and I want him to listen to me, which he does, and I want his caring, which I get. But I don't feel that it's critical that he understands what my emotions are at any given time. In fact, I think that might be something that would set us back if he was scared when I was scared, or was not able to have that distance. I want an expert, not a girlfriend.
I've had a lot of the same experiences as you, Scott, and I think it all comes down to finding the right doctors. So I've had a lot of specialists, and a lot of them who I won't go back and see for that reason. I had one who was a reproductive endocrinologist who I got referred to not about my endometriosis, but about my osteopenia. And I already had a specialist taking care of my endometriosis, but he was out of state, so I couldn't go see him for this. And I have a master's degree in reproductive endocrinology, so it's not like I'm unfamiliar with reproductive endocrinology. I have endometriosis, so it's not that I'm unfamiliar with endometriosis. And she wanted to lecture me the whole time about well, if we put you back on aromatase inhibitors, we're going to have to put you on supplemental estrogens. And I'm like, I'm not going back on these pills. I just had excision surgery. And she's like, well, it comes back. And I'm like, well, that's controversial in the field. There's currently not an agreed upon research on this. And she's like, well, I study it, so I know. I'm like, okay, well, you don't know. You don't understand what I'm going through. And the whole time, my husband's in the appointment, and he's stepping on my toes so I don't jump across the table and hit her because I was so mad. And there's some doctors who have definitely found that do feel challenged by you knowing something about the condition. And I don't let them get away with it. I'm currently a PhD student. I have a background in animal science. And so I get on PubMed and the different research journal publication sites, and I find research to support what I'm saying, and I will take it into doctors and literally be like, look, this journal doesn't agree with our treatment. What are we going to do about this? And if they push back too much, if they're uncomfortable with that, I'll find a new doctor. I'm not afraid to doctor shop. So I currently have an internist who is lovely, and I walk into her office and she knows exactly where we left off. But it took me a long time to get there.
I guess one of the problems is, and I'm wondering whether it's the same for Scott as well, is that geographically, depending on where you live and how your system works, you don't always have that option to doctor shop. And even financially.
Quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, here I'm in a rural area as well, and locally I've got a very small choice of doctors, and I actually have to travel to the city to see my specialist. There's no one locally that I can go see. And issues for that for a lot of patients, I think, gets really frustrating. Like, when I was living in the city, I had more choice. Now I'm far away from the city, my choices are really limited. And I think there are aspects of that, and I think inter-country as well. Our systems are all very different. We don't have the American-style insurance system here, or which I don't really understand because it seems incredibly complex. But we can go and see pretty much what doctor we want here, but it's actually accessing them. And if you've got something that's a little bit left of centre, then trying to find a specialist and all those issues. And I've had horrible doctor experiences, and I've got a great team now. But if I was starting out in the area I live currently, I'd be lost. Like, I'd be in the same incredibly frustrating position as Scott, basically. It's, you know, those kind of issues I think are really hard and need to be explored more, and they're not really explored by the doctors themselves. Whereas with blogging, we can actually get that out there into the community.
Yeah, there's a number of groups in Alberta that are working on this, that are the breakdown of the communication. There's the thing is we have a very sophisticated communication system, but nobody ever talks to each other about it. But the last time my heart failed, I was diagnosed with. The doctors who are members of the local clinic are actually partners with the people. The doctors were looking at me are partners with the person who did it was new of my history, but they're too lazy to call or talk to each other because it's privacy issues within the clinic. And so they misdiagnosed me. So I ended up, when they finally saw her, I was on an airplane within a half an hour. And I just barely made it. So I don't go to doctors locally anymore anyway. None of them will. They don't talk. They always, I don't know how to say it. They don't know medicine. It's like whatever is the disease of the day, they should flash it on the front of the hospital. It's like, today it's going to be gallbladders. And everybody that comes in here, even if they've lost their arm, is going to have a problem with their gallbladder. So that's what we're writing. We've got all the prescriptions written, and we just pick them up at the front desk. And that sort of thing is, I think that's part of the reason that I blog. It's like a total disconnect. And I understand that there are good doctors out there, and I understand that, like, for instance, the guy that saved my life was a great surgeon. He did it twice. But I have to be virtually dead before I get to see him. So I really don't like going through that process. And maybe it's it might be different in the city. I'm not completely convinced it is. Our doctors can't even talk to each other, and they occupy the same building. And
Yeah, I think that's a system issue too. Want to see if Kate's speaker microphone is working because she said she had a lead on it. No. Okay. We were hoping. Yeah, we were hoping it was going to work. I wanted to tie into something that was said just because I found it kind of fascinating, is that I actually have had the opposite issue where my doctors assume that I know things because I read blogs and because I research things going into things, and then they forget to actually tell me about things because they assumed that I knew it already before I went in. I was like, oh, she's highly educated and she's done this, this, and this, so she doesn't need to know about chemotherapy. We'll just throw her into it. Oh, sorry, Scott, I think you're causing an echo. I'm going to mute you there. There we go. That's better. So yeah, no, that's kind of, and I do want to bring this sort of back to the sort of blogging thing and sort of how have you guys seen your blogging progress from where you started to, and maybe tell us a little bit about where you are today with where your blogs are.
Well, after how many years? Almost 7 years. I'm definitely not blogging as often as I used to. I do feel like I've said everything there is to say. I have a scan. It's either progression or it's NED, and I've explored those two things thoroughly. So I'm finding it more difficult to come up with topics. But still, I have. Right now I'm working on a blog post because I had an odd emotion that I'm processing, and I'm do that through writing. So I'm still there, but my blogging has sort of morphed into my Facebook. Instead of doing long blog posts, I'm now more active on Facebook. I have a page and I post, stuff that I've read and stuff that I've read on Medline, new studies, questions that people can interact with. So I find that as a logical progression of just me writing something and then maybe getting comments, having interactive conversations. So that's kind of more what I'm doing now.
Yeah, I'd say I'm probably at the same stage as Anne. Again, I'm 7 years as well, so maybe it's the 7-year thing, I'm not quite sure. But I'm blogging less. I've also been ill, so that hasn't helped things along. But more on Facebook. And I quite like Facebook for that instant conversation, and I can also put in not just illness stuff as well. Yeah. Just something to make people have a bit of a laugh, or a new song I've heard or something. And I'm also more into Instagram as well, particularly when I'm quite unwell. It's a nice short means of communication, and I'm finding that overwhelming need that I had at the start to just get it all out there and share it all and all of that. I don't know whether it's I personally have processed a lot of things now, but I'm sort of more in a stage of, yes, I'll talk about my own illness, but I also need something else non-illness related in my life. I guess it's a strange sort of stage. I still love my blog. I still love writing and communicating my story and helping other people share theirs and things like that. But I don't know. I think that's sort of because I've used blogging as a therapeutic tool for myself, it's sort of, yeah, I've worked through things enough that I don't need to copy, share, or process things, I think.
Yeah, I think I think I've reached the limit on my blog for complaining. So the next step is I'm reading about compassionate listening and trying to.
You're breaking up, Scott. I can't hear you. I don't know if anyone else can.
Mm-mm.
Mm.
What's this? Does that sound better? No? How about the dogs in here like that?
I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure if we're actually going to lose you completely or not. We can't hear you at all, though. We're just getting odd. I was going to read something that Kate had shared in the blocks again, and talking about how she's stepped back a little bit. And she says, I have header pages that people read often. I actually, that has me wondering personally, because I blog so frequently, if that affects hit counts, because people, I don't have one or two things that people focus on. I'm so dispersed in my blogging, which I think is kind of, it's a different sort of perspective on things. So Kate's saying that she watches people that come to Music for Deck chairs and notice the cancer issue, but her cancer status is waiting for the other shoe to drop. Yeah, I get that totally. Totally. I don't know if you saw my latest blog post. And my cancer related health issues aren't primary. Multiple immune issue aren't primary. Multiple autoimmune illnesses. Oh, so your cancer issues aren't. Okay, sorry. I'm not very good at reading. Sometimes I mention, I'm using I from Kate. Sometimes I mention that cancer has changed my perspective on work-related demands. So people who follow the blog know that cancer is a significant part of how I am in the world, altered perspective. I totally do that too, and I actually had different identities personally. I blogged under Becky, and my research blog was Rebecca. It was a separate blog altogether, and it didn't really, the identities didn't really merge until I started researching breast cancer blogs, and so then my research world and my breast cancer world sort of collided, and so now that's why I say I'm Rebecca Becky, because I'm Rebecca in the researcher space and I'm Becky in the cancer space, and I'm sort of in this space both people, so I'm sort of playing it, sort of both things. And I'm wondering, I'm going to throw out a question for you guys about health literacy, and I'm wondering if reading blogs or writing blogs or participating in the blog sphere somehow helped you develop a better advocacy for yourself or better health literacies for yourself, or how did that sort of evolve? And what role did blogging play in that evolution?
I guess for me, I used to work in health, so I sort of knew all the, how to research and all of those kind of aspects. And I don't know if blogging has increased my health literacy so much, but more the ability to take complex information and make it in a form that's more readable for others. So to in turn then help other people's health literacy, I guess. And that was sort of part of my old job as well, was taking complex information and simplifying it and taking out jargon and things like that. And I've also done posts about things like how to sort really crappy medical information from really good stuff, and how to go from the stuff that's on the news. There's always a cure on the news, the latest cure of some disease of sorts, and how to sort that junk and to look through an article, even if you've got no stats information or stats background, how to work through articles. So things like that, I guess, is for other people in a sense more than it is for me.
I'm the same with you there. Since my background is animal science, I was pre-veterinary medicine for a long time until I started getting chronic migraines, and my other symptoms started kicking up, and I couldn't work around livestock anymore. And so I've always kind of had that literacy, I think, built in with my schooling. And so I try and share things on my blog that helps other people develop their literacy. And Rebecca and I are kind of talking about off the side, and I'm not going to go too much into it because we're still working a lot of stuff out, but using a annotation program, Hypothesis, to kind of community annotate either consent papers or journal articles or something and share the patient side and help bridge that literacy as well.
Oh, that'd be fantastic.
We'll invite you to join.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree with Michelle. I consider now one of the things I've morphed into as somebody teaching. I teach other people, I feel, how to handle their medical condition and what, like Michelle said, what is good information and what is poor information. Also how to handle the doctor-patient relationship. It is not, you know, anymore the doctor is the God you look up to and you just take what he says. You have to look up information and ask questions, and I try to encourage and teach people how to do that. So I think that's one of the ways it's morphed, and one of the ways that I feel like I'm helping.
I'm going to read what Kate typed in the chat box here. And she says, following other people's blogs and thinking about what she's writing hasn't changed her medical literacy, but her illness literacy and her own narrative research in other fields. I like that distinction personally between medical literacy and illness literacy. And she says, I have a clearer grasp of illness within life. My background is in media and communication, and now narrative research. So my oncologist studies me and I study her, and we joke about this a little uneasily. And she thinks patient-doctor communication could improve. But by this, she means patients could improve our communication with doctors. She wants patients to be better at concisely describing symptoms and side effects. She wants a clearer account. And I explained to her how patients might be thinking when they simply seem unclear to her. And I love that, Kate. That's a really fantastic point you made there.
I love the illness literacy idea rather than the medical literacy idea. I think that's brilliant, because that's really what we're talking about here is using blogs and using social media as better ways to understand our illness. But also, we all seem to be educators, right? And I wonder if that's an interesting thing, too, is that transition from blogosphere as well of the person who writes about their thing. I don't know, how many people were educators before they started blogging? Because I was. So I was an educator before Kate as well. But I'm wondering if any of you guys were in education prior to blogging.
I was a high school secretary. I don't think you'd say that was education.
I was in...
Go ahead. Go ahead, Michelle.
Oh, I was going to say, I used to be a neuropsychologist, so part of my job was educative, but it wasn't, well, I guess in a sense it was educative, but it was a large amount of it was making information available from doctor down to patient and taking into account, you know, various cognitive impairments and things like that, and being able to share the information across the board. So, yeah.
I worked with apprentices explaining all the stuff that they learned in the apprenticeship school. Now I had to be stopped because things are falling down around us and they're killing people. So,
We still can't hear you, Scott. Sorry.
Sorry.
We're still not getting your audio.
If you type it in the chat, we can read it out too. They'll always make something work.
Yes, exactly. We can make this work. Right, and we are coming up onto the hour. If we can go for about 5 or 10 more minutes, and then we're going to have to close off because we did start a little late as well, if that's good for everybody. And now I lost my train of thought.
I was in a GTA in animal science before I switched over to education, so I kind of was in education before I started blogging too, as well.
I was going to talk, actually, I was going to mention something that I mentioned in the other one because it's sort of related to what Kate was talking about with that discussion with her physician. at one of the conferences I went to a session on social media with doctors, presented by a doctor, about physician use of social media. And one of the physicians there, she's an emergency room physician, had said she read blogs to help her better understand the symptoms that people were showing up in the emergency room with. And so she would read blogs of different people with different critical illnesses so that when they showed up in her emergency room, she'd understand the language they were using to describe their symptoms. And I thought that that was actually really brilliant. And she was pretty particular because we were talking about some of the ethics of it, because of the ethics of your doctor using your blog and what's in their medical record versus what's not in your medical record and the confusion around that. And her comment was she didn't read blogs of people within the same city because she didn't want to risk reading a blog of somebody who might end up in her emergency room and then be her patient. And so she only read blogs of people who she would hope to never be have that patient relationship with, which I thought was kind of fascinating, actually.
I've gotten a lot of contact, and I don't know if it was you, Becky. Somebody sent me a link to an article or an abstract written with my blog mentioned in it, and it was you. Yeah, it was fascinating because I had not known they were studying my blog or looking through it, and apparently were using that as part of their project. And I've had that a few times over the years that people have found it for that. My blog is listed on the NIH as a part of their educational resources, so I find that interesting.
And
I think that says something. Oh,
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that says something about the quality of your blog as well, Anne.
Oh.
You know, that they're recognizing what you've done and how great it is. So I'd take that as a huge pat on the back.
Thank you.
And I'm going to pose a new question from that, which is, how do you feel about that? Like, being cited in papers and not having the researchers let you know about it or ask permission first. Like, how do you feel about them using you but not sharing that participation with you?
I feel like it's the internet, right? So if you put it on the internet, it's there for the taking. Personally, I would like people to know. I don't feel like they have to ask permission, but I'd like to know for my own curiosity. And plenty of people, especially in colleges, write me and tell me about what they're doing. Usually students, not professors, about whatever they're doing. But apparently a lot of people don't. But it's fine. It's, go ahead.
Would you prefer if they did use what you put out there that they let you know? Like, that they said, oh, hey, we published this paper because we used your blog?
I would like to know. And it's interesting because they'll take a very small, I know nobody can read the whole thing, there's hundreds of thousands of words there, but they'll take a very small piece and use that as illustrative of something that isn't exactly what I meant at all. So I find that kind of interesting. And I wouldn't correct them necessarily, but I would like to know. I would like to know who's using my stuff and what they're using it for. I think it would be, fascinating, but I would never deny permission unless it was, well, for used for evil, which it wouldn't be. But I just would be curious to know. Yeah.
I was just going to ask if you would correct them if they reached out to you and said, "Here's what we interpreted from your blog. Is this what you feel it means?" Because that's a big part of qualitative research.
Yeah, absolutely. If they asked, I would correct them. It's interesting. You write what you're feeling at any given moment, and people interpret it often a lot differently than you meant. And that's part of writing. And hopefully you learn from that and get better at what you're doing. But that's the nature of writing. And so it would be nice to be able to correct it and say, no, that's not what I meant. This is what I meant. I never go back over my blog and rewrite anything because I think that would be cheating. But there are a lot of posts that I think, that isn't really written the way I actually think. So Yeah. It would be good to correct the record, but the record stands.
That's actually a really good point, Anne, because it's actually that's one of the things I'm researching right now, right? I'm looking at the use of breast cancer blogs, which is why I came across this. And every time I see a blogger directly quoted in a research paper, I send it to the blogger so that they know, because often the ethics of what's ethical in that space is actually very different based upon the type of research that's being done. And so researchers that are doing it in different areas don't actually, their ethical guidelines don't call for any of that. Whereas in other spaces, the ethical guidelines do call for that connection. But then there's also that whole issue with research ethics boards, and the minute I talk to somebody, I need ethical approval to talk to them. So I can read your blog and use it in my research without needing to get approval, but I need approval if I want to talk to you. And so that is a barrier, and it's actually where ethics is getting in the way of doing good research, because it's slowing people. Like, people are just like, oh, well, why would I talk to you if I have to get approval to do that?
Yeah.
And as Kate is saying, the approval maze being the problem. But it is a challenge when you're a researcher sitting in that place. I wonder if Michelle has any thoughts on that.
I guess one of the things, I think, again, yes, the ethics differs across the board, unfortunately, but also the feeling for a lot of people, it's, well, we cite all these other things anyway, and we don't go for every article, go back to who wrote it and say, you know, give us further comment on this. We don't ask their permission to use it. And I think a lot of them think the same way as with blogs as well. So there's not that, I mean, personally, I would prefer if they contacted me, considering it's more of a personal story. But I think there is still that, oh, well, we're just citing someone, as opposed to we're citing an individual's personal experience. I think, yeah.
Mm-hmm. For me personally, what frustrates me is when people put the little acknowledgments and thank their academic supervisors and then don't thank the bloggers that they used their blogs for the data. And it's like, do you not understand how much effort went into writing that blog? And all you could have said was, and thank you to the bloggers. And, you know, the only researchers that I've seen doing that are ones that are doing self-research, like some ones that are doing research that are insiders, so that are also bloggers, so they also appreciate that effort, and so they actually do that. But it's actually quite a sort of fascinating thing. And Kate is saying, as a narrative researcher, she really values and respects the principle of co-production. Other people's stories aren't data for me to exploit. And that's exactly where I sort of I sit in that space as well. But then I also get frustrated with the research ethics process that prevents me from actually talking to people in order to actually do that co-production or that co-understanding back and forth, because I need to document every sentence I'm going to say to somebody or have that conversation. It's kind of crazy, actually. But by putting it on the internet, then suddenly it's freely available. But I want to go back to something that Anne mentioned, because it's actually something that somebody ran into that was doing research, is that's one of the pitfalls of using blogs, is that bloggers can always go back and change what they said. And then it becomes a different account, right? It becomes the retelling of the story instead of the telling of the original story. And I, too, won't do it. The only thing I will go back and correct are typos. Obvious typos, like if I spelt something wrong, or, you know, that kind of stuff. But I won't go back and reread or actually I will have to go back and reread for my research, but I won't go back and rewrite anything that's in my blog. I don't think that becomes a mistelling in my perspective.
Yeah.
But it's also, there's no code of ethics within blogging either, which is another issue, I think. And there are bloggers who hold themselves to a higher standard, and then there are other bloggers who don't. And I think it's very hard, you know, I don't know how you would enforce the code of ethics for things like that. There is no real way to do it. But, I mean, that's the reality of it. Blogging has opened up the voice for so many different people and it also, in that sphere, it's a whole host of personalities, a whole host of backgrounds, and not all of them are going to approach blogging with the same considerations in mind, I guess.
Well, I think that researchers have to be very careful when read our blogs, because they don't really know the background of the person writing it, and they don't know how honest we're actually being. So I personally am honest with everything that I have written, but that doesn't mean everybody is, and there's been plenty of people who turn out not even to have diseases who've written blogs. So you have to be very careful anytime you're online. We all know that, but it goes in the research space too.
And I wonder whether it's something about, like we talked about before, the nuance of living illness versus being the doctor. And the same with blogging. If you're not blogging, do you know those nuances as well? And quite often a lot of people, as we've already discussed, who are writing about blogging, social media and patient engagement, they're not actually blogging themselves. So are they understanding those nuances?
Yeah, Lisa said something about I'm sorry, Lisa Adam. I'm blanking on the name.
Kate.
Kate. Yeah, Kate. About, remember what the New York Times people did to Lisa Boncheck Adams, who she documented her entire illness up until death on Twitter and her blog, and the New York Times just reamed her for it, and it was awful. What they did to her. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of off topic, but it was...
That was horrendous.
Yeah. She was doing a lot of good, I think, for a lot of people. And to be treated so callously by those husband and wife team is it's awful. And all of us have to beware that not everybody is reading us for the right purposes as well.
I'm going to jump back the conversation a little bit just to read what's been typed here in the chat. So Scott said earlier that the medical world isn't my concern. I'm concerned with the people and how they feel, and not versions of how they feel. And then as we got into telling the story and editing blogs, Kate said, but surely tellings are always retellings. It's okay for tellings to evolve over time. And she notes that if she changes something on her blog, she adds a note saying why she changed it and what happened. And Scott added on to that the process of change is also really important, because changing our mind, the process of change is really important. So changing our minds is almost the most important aspect of writing it down, which I think builds on that. If you do make a change or make a note of the change, that process is also just as important as staying true to what you said in the first place.
And for my research, because I'm doing autoethnography, what I'm going to be looking at doing is actually that retelling and retelling and retelling. So it's actually an iterative process of retelling, of looking at the story and then looking at the reactions to the story, and then figuring out, in some ways, an artistic way of retelling it, which is an interesting sort of juxtaposition for me, who's used to blogging, and my background is travel blogging, so I started with a bike trip, and so for that it was very much documenting our journey, but also very factual aspects of different things, and so to move on to sort of an emotional, but then also learning how to write in a way to communicate the emotions and understand that it doesn't have to be exactly in line with exactly the factual account of what happened. And I think that that's going to be an interesting sort of way of learning how to blog in that aspect, but it comes back to that whole ethical question of what, how much do you trust the source, right? How much do you trust the blog? Yeah, we are sort of getting off topic. We're also running out of time. And so I'm going to throw this back to give everyone sort of one last chance or one last thing to say about what they think about, blogging, why you blog, the topic of why do we make something that's so private public, and what your sort of motivation or what your internal feelings are about that. And I will throw it out there for everyone to say one last sort of thing before we close.
I think the reason that I blog and continue to blog this day is to help other people and teach them how to get through a critical illness, especially since I have become metastatic and the end result is not going to be so good for me, and yet, on the other hand, I've lived 5 years, which is a very long time, so it gives people hope. So I want to help people know that there is life after that diagnosis, and it can be a good life. So that's why I continue.
Yeah, well, I'd probably say, again, a lot of the same things as Anne's saying about that good life with illness. I think there's very much a perception that once you become ill, whatever it might be, life's over, doesn't continue, it's just going to be horrible from now on. And it's so far from the truth. And I think it's really important to get that out there. And I think that alone can help so many people, because it just moves away from the narrative we've been sold for generations that, illness is the end of the world. And I think still part of my reason for blogging is it's a real act of rebellion that we are silenced so much about the illness experience. Being able to share that with the world and share that with other people and help them in the process, I find is a bit of a personal rebellion. Particularly, I grew up in a family where you just didn't discuss illness, never discussed it. It was embarrassing, it was weak, and all those kind of things. So I think sharing that, as much as it's helping other people, it's still helping me in the process as well.
I don't realize that we have two people that don't have audio working. So, Brittany, do you want to say one thing before we end?
If my brain works again. Hold on, I was typing something in the chat, and so I got off gears. Actually, I'll just say what I was typing in the chat, and then hop back to it. Since we've had so many people who with technical issues, and we haven't had mics this time, I just want to get a feel for everybody if we make a copy of the chat, because usually we make a transcription of this, and pull out those pieces. Are you guys okay with that? We don't usually share what's in the group chat because we do recognize that it is a back channel safe spot, but I don't want this part, your contributions, to be missed. So if you don't mind, please let us know. And yeah, my brain's done. I lost where we were. It's late here. So I'll end on that.
Yeah, that sounds like a great near ending. I want to say, Kate, one of the things that she said in here was just thank you all. Much to think about, and Anne, thank you especially. That hope is specifically relevant to Kate. So, and I think it's specifically relevant to so many people out there. And Michelle as well, right? You guys are dealing with a lot of crap. And so, yeah. But you're sharing a lot, and it matters. And I think that's true for everybody out there. It matters. And so with that, I'm going to go off air and end this session. We'll do a quick wave. You don't need to hang up, but we will turn off the recording.